In today's video, we will be replacing this original oak brown, I believe is the color of it, steering wheel exterior. We will not be replacing the foam, but I went online and found a replacement that you sew on, so I'm gonna give it a try. The company is called East Detailing. Not sure if you can read it there or not. They sell a wide assortment of different steering wheel wraps that you can put on your car, so I've heard good things about them, so I wanted to give them a try. They also come with some tools, so you get this nice little orange plastic tool to help push the wrap into place. You get some needle and thread, a little thimble, and some double-sided tape to keep it in place while you sew it. Now, if you're a guy, you can probably just throw the instructions away as normal, but as I am making this an instructional video, and I've never sewn before, I'm gonna keep these and use these to my advantage, but it doesn't seem too terribly difficult. They give you the step-by-step on how to sew, as well as some pictures for a different steering wheel. I guess this is just a general wheel that they use to kind of show you the pictures of how it is done. They do note that you do not have to take the steering wheel off, and I do not plan on taking mine off, so we'll go ahead and get right in it by removing the original. Now, I'm typically pretty slow with these jobs, but for this, I'm not sure the best way to get it off, so I'm just going to start kind of tearing it apart by trying to also not damage the foam, but we're just going to kind of slowly pull it apart and see what we can do here. So it looks like the easiest way is kind of just take your time, get some strings going, and then slowly pull it through. What you could probably do is just trim these as you go, make it a little bit easier so you have less string to work with. Now as you come to the different spokes, there's the threading that goes across here, and as you get that undone, there's a little bit that's tucked back behind in the crease. So you'll just start to kind of pull that out. Again, you're gonna have that adhesive, but you're just gonna peel it back and slowly continue working it down. So the best way that I've found as I've gone through the wheel is to use a knife, just a small knife, to cut the strings where it is all stitched in, and that makes it really easy as you go to pull it apart. If the strings are already cut or slightly frayed, they pull apart really easily. That way you can separate it and then pull it along. Okay, so now we have got the wrap entirely off, but you can see that there is this residue on here, so we're going to use some rubbing alcohol to wipe it off. One last thing, I came by with a toothbrush and cleaned up some of these high touch areas just to make sure the entire working environment was clean. And so now it's time for the tape. We're going to go ahead and put this on the wrap itself. So I've got it here. We're going to cut it off into small sections, making sure to keep it from touching the edge. Now we've got all of the double-sided tape on there so you can kind of see it. I tried to do an adequate amount, but not too much or too little. But I went ahead and did all the spokes. So now the next step is going to be to slide it over the wheel and get it right into place. Also, just a fun little note, this little sticker on the inside of the leather reads Model 1997 Toyota Camry. And if you are also not aware, the steering wheel on the facelifted third generation 4Runner is the same of the mid-90s Toyota Camry. Okay, so now we have the cover in place. It's all wrapped around. I've got it lined up pretty well with the top part here. And so as the instructions read, I'm going to start at the 6 o'clock position and then work up to the 3 and 9 and the 12 o'clock position. That way we won't have it all bunched up in any one particular spot. Alright, so we got it all stuck down with the double-sided tape. I've got all my scraps down there. So it's coming along, and you can still manipulate the material even once the tape is down. So if you find that you're not exactly lined up, that's okay. Now to begin the more difficult part, and that is going to be to start the sewing of the actual cover. Now, in an effort to give you guys the best video possible, I went ahead and already did a couple sections so I could have a little bit better feedback as I walk through some other sections. So I'm going to show you what I've done and kind of tell you some of the tips that I've gotten so far, and then we'll go ahead into this bottom section and I'll show you how to do that. So I have been following the instructions here with starting the threading and also on the back side as well. And so this is what I have completed so far. I started right here in this upper left spoke and I stitched all the way around and I've made it to here. I also began stitching on this bottom side. I know it's kind of dark with it being black. I stitched down to here and I have not finished off this spoke, but I've got a pretty good feel for it now. I did the single stitching here and then I did a double stitch, or I skipped a stitch on this side right here, so I think it turned out pretty well. And then same thing over here, it's just a single stitch on the perforated part. But what I want to do now, really just to kind of tighten it up and show you guys the best way that I've learned now that I've been working on this for a handful of hours, with this being my first time, is I'm going to start right here, and that's going to help to pull some of this material down as I work the stitch across, and it's also going to pull it down this way such that when I begin this threading, hopefully it'll all align. So we will take our needle and our thread and tie them together. Alright, so we are all locked in with our needle and thread, and it is a good rule of thumb to use about 3 times the length of thread in comparison to the section that you're doing. So we'll go ahead and look at that. So for this bottom section right here, we'll say it's about 8 to 10 inches long, and so we would want about 24 to 30 inches worth of thread. You don't want to run out and then have to tie 2 pieces of thread together to do the entire thing, or go back to have one seamless piece and rethread the entire bit. Okay, now that we have our thread length, we have our needle, and I've gone ahead and tied a knot in the end of the string. Not sure what the best knot is, but that's a big fat knot that hopefully will not come out of the cover, and I haven't had any issues even as I've been tightening down these other areas, so this should definitely do the trick. But what we're going to do is start on the inside, the back part, and the inside of the cover, and we're going to poke it through this way, so towards the gas pedal, and then loop it back over and into this front part of the wrap. So I'll try and show you that. Okay, so here I am poking through the back side of the wrap, and I've come through this way. I know it's kind of hard to tell, but I'm poking through from the inside to the out, and now I'm going to push this through, all the way through. Okay, so pull it all the way through until my knot hits. So right there, there's my knot, and now I'm going to pull it back through this way. I'm going to want to take my needle now and then come through this top stitch, so right about here, come through that first hole and tighten it up. And now as I'm tightening up that first stitch, I want to kind of make sure that everything is sitting properly, and so I'll kind of move the material around with my hands as I tighten it up and kind of pull it tight, and we'll move to our next stitch. Now I know it's really hard to tell, but we've gone from the outside in on this piece as we've shown, and now we're going from the inside out like we started on this back piece. So I've pushed it back through the original hole, and now we tighten it up, and we should be going from there. Now that we've gotten that tightened up and pulled through, our next step is to come through one of the stitches that come from the manufacturer. If you're looking at the instructions, it's just the red stitching. So we'll poke that through on this side, if it'll focus in, poke it through on this side and push it up like so, and then pull all the thread. Okay, so you can now see that I've got some of the stitching done down here. So we're making some good progress around that corner. I've had to kind of massage the material, and you can see it's kind of loose right now, and it'll be that way until I really tighten it up. And as I go, I'll come back with a needle and just tighten up each one of these cross threads right here. So it'll pull out all that slack as I move across, and it'll really button up the leather to the wheel. But I'm gonna keep on going. I'll try and show you as I go. Now we're about halfway through this bottom section right here. I will recommend that you overlap, so as the one piece of leather goes over the other, that you overlap rather than butting them together like this in stitching. You're going to get a bit of a tighter feel when you overlap, and if you do the front side overlapping the back side, you really will not see it at all. I made the mistake on this upper portion and butted them up for the most part, and you can see it's kind of got some slack in it. I also maybe didn't tighten it up as much as I could have, but that's one thing to note. Also another note, on the bottom side, all I've done is just stitching back and forth, but you can see up here, this is the skipping a stitch pattern right here. So it's going to save you a little bit of thread, a little bit of time. You can see on the perforated part, like I said, I just went back and forth, but here I skipped a stitch, and then continue that all the way through just this black upper, and then swap back to stitching back and forth on this end. And now as we approach the corner, I want to make sure that all the material is tucked in as best as possible, and then I can kind of pull these two pieces together as I now begin the corner. Now we're nearing the end. You can see I've got the corner buttoned up pretty well. Working on the top part here as we kind of round it out, but we've run into a bit of a debacle in the sense that the back is all it's got a big old bump in it, so I guess I'm gonna have to try and work that out, see if we can get that massaged out. So we're looking pretty good on the front end. The back, if you can see, it's still a little bit wavy, almost kind of lumpy. There you go, you can kind of see it there. So we'll see if that'll work itself out over time, but I'm gonna go ahead and bind off this bottom part. So following the instructions here, right in this spot, we've wrapped it around the last little thread. Now we are putting it back through the holes where the red stitching would start. So that's what I've done. And I've gone from the outside in through both of them, and then we're going to begin the back stitching, which is shown right here in these two. And we'll back stitch it about 3 to 5 stitches. So now that I've tightened it up with this bottom needle, you can see that material that was hanging down is now cinched up, and I'm going to stitch back this direction the same way that we've been stitching this whole time, just back and forth. And now before I tie off this bottom part, I'm going to work on this top area, tighten it up a little bit, and then we'll tie them both off. And just to give you guys another angle for this one, as we tighten it up, we went around the last bit here, the last seam. We've gone back across the other side, and we're going from the outside in through both pieces of material, and then we'll come back across. So now we'll cinch it up. Hopefully it kind of pulls that material in together. Okay, that'll kind of work. Okay, so there is the stitch work. It is not the best. I will not be doing any Aston Martin or Rolls-Royce interiors at any point in the future, but it is backstitched now, and we're gonna go ahead and tie it off. It says the lighter method, which I'm guessing they mean, let's see, where does it say that? When binding off, blah, 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 5 millimeters around for not by lighter. I've just been looping it around a piece of thread and then tying it off, and that seems to be decent, so we're gonna go with that. So here we go, we've kind of got our knot formed. Just kind of cinch it up like that, and then I'm just gonna cut it, and it should be good to go. And so now here is what you're left with. So now here we are on the top side. You can see the knot, maybe kind of sorta right there, and it should hold up. I guess I'll let you know if it doesn't, but it looks fairly clean. Obviously we've got some material that's kind of loose right here, which I'm not a big fan of, but we'll see. We'll go ahead and tighten up this bottom part and see how it looks. So now for this last part, we've got our needle, we've got our thread. We're going to start on the inside, remember, of the wrap. We're going to tie that knot, make sure it gets stuck, loop it back around, and then we'll get to stitching this spot right here, and we'll close it off right here. Now I have finished up this last little section, and to help keep the material down as it was kind of poking up, similar to what you'll see here, I took the thread and I wrapped it around the spoke. So I came through to start the back stitching, and then I wrapped it all the way around and then began the back stitching back and forth, and that's helped to keep this nice and flush and it doesn't poke up at all. So with that, the wheel is now complete. And so here's some of the stitch work. Not the best, but for the first time, I think it is okay. Of course, there were some mistakes. One of the biggest issues is the bubbles that I have gotten, and you can kind of see one there. There's another one that's down here. It's not really noticeable. And then there's a bigger one up here that isn't, it's because it's not super tight against this spoke. And so you can kind of, yeah, you can kind of see it there. Nothing huge, but I think since I didn't set the wheel down and tape it maybe as well as I should have, some of the materials maybe bunched up on this side while it was a little looser on this side, as the tape was kind of holding it in place. And then as I began to stitch, I didn't accommodate for it, so I didn't work the material enough to help relieve some of these bubbles. And so now this is the state that I'm left with. I still think it looks really good, but that's just one tip, is make sure you've got it set down and slowly work it as you go. Another tip is to try and overlap the material if it seems like it's going to be loose. So you can see I've got a little bit of play up here. I know it's dark, but there's a little bit of play up in here. And if I would have overlapped the material as it wrapped around the wheel, I think a lot of that would have gone away and the wrap would be a lot tighter. For example, down on this bottom portion, I did wrap the front part over the back, and it is very tight. There's really no wiggle whatsoever. It feels very comfortable. That's definitely the most that's the best part of the wrap. Unfortunately, that's probably an area that I don't touch all that much, but nonetheless, I definitely learned going across the top such that on the bottom part I did it properly. Overall, I'm very happy with how this turned out for the money. I think it looks a lot better than obviously the original that was falling apart, and it looks a lot better than the AutoZone special steering wheel cover that you might see people buy. For the money, definitely a good deal. If you could get some extra needles, I would do that, such that you can start in multiple locations and really pull the wheel cover into place. But nonetheless, I think it looks great. Definitely one thing to note, this took me a long time, probably over 6 hours from me reading the instructions and then actually executing. the entire stitching process. So if this is your first time, have some patience and go slow. Don't be afraid to back out some of the stitching so that you do it right. Last thing you want to have is a wheel cover that has tons of bubbles in it. It doesn't look right. The stitching comes unraveled. So just take your time and be patient. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and maybe learned a little something, gave you the knowledge to tackle covering your own steering wheel. With that, I will see you guys in the next one. And now before we get started, I did do some practice threading here on the old piece, and you can actually see there's a serial number in here, BA93254, and then space 1-7. Not sure what the heck that means, but I did do some practice to at least get a feel for the needle.